tonight.
Any damage, whether intentional or not, would spell catastrophe.
United Nations nuclear investigators raise concerns over a Ukrainian power plant as war rages around it. Plus, midterms 2022, a new Republican push to win over voters come November. And
we had 15 minutes to grab everything and run.
The latest on the wild weather plaguing the West Coast. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Ukrainian forces advance through Russian lines. Thanks for joining us for Faith Nation. I'm in Washington. I'm Tara Mergener. A surprise offensive is helping Ukraine gain ground in the Russian invasion. But with this new military momentum, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe sits directly in the line of fire. Now, the United Nations has a warning for both sides. Stand down or risk nuclear catastrophe. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us with tonight's top story. Caitlin.
Tara, a team of UN inspectors braved the war zone last week to tour the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Their goal? To assess the safety situation there.
We are playing with fire, and something very, very catastrophic could take place.
Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, told the UN Tuesday that the physical integrity of the facility has been compromised by continued shelling around the plant.
The physical attack, wittingly or unwittingly, the hits that this facility has received and that I could personally see and assess together with my experts is simply unacceptable.
Twice in just the last few weeks, the plant has been knocked offline and forced to rely on backup generators to run its safety systems. The IAEA now calling for Russia and Ukraine to immediately stop all military operations in the area and establish a nuclear safe zone. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he would support a demilitarized protection zone and adds the Russians must be forced to return full control of the plant back to Ukraine. In an exclusive interview with ABC News, Zelensky claims Russia is using the facility as a weapon.
You see, they occupied our nuclear station, 6 blocks, the biggest in the Europe. It means 6 Chernobyls. It means the biggest danger in the Europe. So they occupied it. So that means that they use nuclear weapon. That is nuclear weapon.
Zelensky says the Kremlin ultimately wants to move the plant from Ukraine's power grid to Russia's. Moscow, meanwhile, says Ukraine is responsible for putting the Zaporizhzhia facility at risk and wants more information on the IAEA report, saying there are a number of issues with it. 2 inspectors remain to monitor the plant's operation. Director Grossi says they will also continue to evaluate the situation there and report back to the United Nations. Tara?
Caitlin, thank you. Here with us now, Brent Sadler, Senior Fellow for Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology at the Heritage Foundation. Brent, in that report, we heard the IAEA Director General warn that something, quote, very catastrophic could take place in regards to the nuclear plant. Should the world be more concerned?
Well, the world should be concerned. There is a potential of radioactive release. Most likely, if it were to occur, it would be localized in the area immediately around Zaporizhzhia. So what I would definitely just put out of people's mind is a repeat of something like 1986's Chernobyl nuclear disaster or the more recent 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster. This would probably be localized, but still the potential of release of radioactivity.
So what's going to bring an end to the fighting around that plant, like the shelling?
Well, 2 things. One, both sides could be compelled because of conditions on the front lines of the fighting changing, where they move military forces out and away from Zaporizhzhia power plant. Right now, it seems like the Russian occupation of the power plant was part of its initial campaign to occupy the sources of power so that it could control the cities, the population centers. That plan hasn't played out, and they're now into a long war of attrition. The other possibility, however unlikely, is a negotiated movement of forces out of the area or establishment of what members of the IEA are calling a secure bubble. That's very, I think, unlikely, given the heated conflict and the offensives that are ongoing in the South.
Do you think the U.S. should be doing more to hold Russia accountable when it comes to these attacks?
Well, absolutely. I think the United States and the international community writ large needs to apply pressure on all sides to move the fighting away from an area that has no tactical significance to where the front lines are. Those forces should never have been in occupation or should not have been still there for months now in possession of Zaporizhzhia power site. They need to be pressurized to move the fighting out of there. And the pressure actually needs to be applied on both sides.
So the U.S. keeps sending more money to Ukraine to aid in this fight. The latest $13.7 billion. That is the request from the White House. So now you've got senators on both sides, like Democrat Tim Kaine from Virginia and Republican Tom Tillis from North Carolina. They're asking for more information as to where that money would go. Do you think the White House needs to be more transparent?
Up to a degree. I think first and foremost, actions need to be taken to ensure that Putin and Russia are not successful in Ukraine. That'll have far-reaching negative implications to the United States' security and national interest. That being said, more transparency about the utility and the effectiveness of what is being given to Ukraine absolutely would be a benefit. But again, not for the security of the transfer of that equipment to Ukraine.
Gotcha. So now we're 6 months into this, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What is going to finally bring this to an end?
I think it's probably going to be a combination of battlefield losses on the part of Russia, as well as continued pressures on the Russian economy. However, both of those Russia's been able to mitigate both of those to an extent. So it's going to require more action, more activity, and some creative thinking on the part of the West to try to change things on the battlefield as well as on the home front in Russia.
All right, Brent, thank you so much for those thoughts. Well, turning to midterms now, Republicans want your vote come November, and they're going to tell you why they should get it. Axios reports House minority is preparing to unveil the GOP's, quote, commitment to America. The document is meant to highlight four main focuses of Republicans, including an economy that is strong, a nation that is safe, a future that is free, and a government that is accountable. According to Axios, the document gives GOP candidates a unified message to run on the final stretch before Election Day. Well, young people are enthusiastic to vote in the upcoming midterm elections following the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. That is according to recent polling from Next Gen America, which found 47% of registered voters 18 to 35 say they are very motivated to head to the polls. That's up nearly 10 points from a similar survey back in March. When young female voters were asked about the Supreme Court decision to overturn abortion, 76% opposed it. That includes 57% of young Republican women. In that voting bloc, only 36% agreed with the Supreme Court. With us now is Tony Perkins, president of Family Research Council. Tony, thank you for being here. Tony, let's start there. Between student loan forgiveness, social media targeting, the aftermath of the Roe decision, Democrats are working really hard to win these young voters. Is it going to make a big difference come November?
Well, now let's not connect the student loan to turning young people out to vote. That's not supposed to be the case, but in fact, I think it actually is. When we're looking at something that's going to cost taxpayers billions of dollars, it comes at a very suspicious time, right before the fall election. I would say this, though. I think the issue of abortion and the Dobbs case cuts both ways. I think when you look at the younger generation, very pro-life, I think the question has to be asked of many of these Democratic candidates that are now trying to put Republicans on the defensive, and frankly, they're doing a pretty good job at this point, but Republicans need to ask, all right, what's the line for these Democrats? At what point would they not allow abortion? Is it the day before birth? Is it the day after birth? Is it when the child feels pain? Is it when there's a heartbeat? At what point would they agree that this is a human life that needs to be protected? I think that's the question that voters and Republicans need to be asking these Democratic candidates.
You know, as we just reported also, Leader McCarthy is set to unveil the GOP commitment to America. So do you think Republicans need to unify ahead of these midterms?
Oh, I think so. I think they need to go on the offense. I see this in the context of, let me use a military analogy, the D-Day invasion, largest amphibious assault in the history of modern warfare. And I think what we saw in Dobbs was a huge, significant cultural, political, and I would add spiritual victory for the sanctity of human life. But, you know, after D-Day and that massive, that huge victory, which was very costly, but it was a huge victory, then we had the Nazis regathering and we had the Battle of the Bulge, in which World War II almost lost. We almost lost it. The Allied forces almost lost it. So I think to see this counter-offensive that's taking place, pushing back on this recognition of the sanctity of human life should not take us by surprise. I think there was some complacency. I think we're 9 weeks away from the election. 2 months ago, people thought that it was going to be a sweep for Republicans. It's changed at this moment. It will and can change again. I feel pretty confident. It's a matter of taking the message to the voters. And I will say this is a turnout election. Everybody needs to be registered and they need to be voting their values. And that includes Christians across this country.
Now, in this political climate, you often hear people decry mixing faith and politics. But in just a week, your FRC is hosting the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit. I've been to this summit. It's amazing, but tell us what the goal is.
Well, it's just that, 3 action steps. Pray. We're going to be praying for our nation. We're going to be talking about voting, our biblical values, encouraging people to go back home, register voters, educate voters, and to stand for biblical truth. And the whole 2.5 days is going to be about equipping Christians to do just that. We're going to hear from Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor Brian Kemp is going to be there. We're going to hear from Jensen Franklin. Just an extensive list of Christian leaders who are going to be there, encouraging, challenging, educating Christians from across this country at a very critical moment in the nation at the time of in the history of our nation.
Absolutely, Tony. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Historic heat gives way to raging fires, the latest on extreme weather on the West Coast when Faith Nation returns. Wildfires, deadly heat, even a looming hurricane are among the dangerous weather conditions facing the United States. As the temperatures and the heat-related deaths rise, experts warn of power grid overload and potential blackouts. Here now is CBN's Brody Carty. Brody, you spoke with a meteorologist about the extreme weather. What is ahead of us?
Well, Tara, California is once again on fire, with 14 wildfires currently burning throughout the state. That's in addition to a heat wave that's so extreme that residents there are hoping a hurricane off the West Coast can help put out the flames and tame the temperatures. 50 million people across the western third of the U.S. are living under a record-breaking heat wave likely to continue through the weekend.
In addition to daily highs being broken, we had all-time record highs set in San Jose, King City, and also Merced.
Drought conditions coupled with high winds have sparked the numerous wildfires burning in California. This year, more than 130,000 acres have been affected.
We had 15 minutes to grab everything and run, and it was on fire below my house when I was leaving.
Thousands evacuated homes near Hemet, California, where the fire killed 2 and injured others. CAL FIRE estimates the spreading flames could burn up to another 7,000 acres.
We're heading to the worst part of this heat wave, and the risk for outages is real and it's immediate.
Sky-high temps means surging demand for electricity to keep cool and concerns of widespread power outages, leading the governor to tell residents to cut back on energy usage.
Please turn your thermostat up to 78 degrees or higher and avoid, to the extent possible, using any really large appliances.
An excessive heat warning remains in effect through the weekend, while residents along the Pacific coast hope Hurricane K might bring some much-needed rain.
That sounds good. We could use the rain, but thunderstorms unfortunately contain lightning, and that could start additional fires, and we don't need any more of that.
Bernie Rayno with AccuWeather told me the hurricane help Californians hope to get is unlikely.
All right, we are in the heart of the hurricane season. We have twin hurricanes, Danielle and Earl. Both those systems stay well east of the United States. That dip in the jet stream across the eastern United States keeps those storms off to the east. So no landfalling storms, no direct impacts in the United States, at least through this weekend.
And while that's a good sign for the Atlantic coast this week, Bernie sees a 50% chance of a hurricane developing in the tropics next week. Tara?
All right, Brody, certainly a lot to watch. Thank you. How do you sniff out COVID infections in a crowd? So when we come back, man's best friend joins the fight against COVID-19. In the future, fighting against COVID could look a lot like the fight against the flu, with a yearly COVID shot tailored to the most dominant variants.
We likely are moving towards a path with a vaccination cadence similar to that of the annual influenza vaccine, with annual updated COVID-19 shots matched to the currently circulating strains for most of the population.
That new guidance comes as recently approved booster shots roll out across the country, specifically targeting Omicron variants. The administration's challenge now will be getting people to actually get a booster. The CDC reports only 1 in every 3 people over the age of 5 has gotten one. As the country heads into fall and winter, COVID cases are expected to rise, so accurate testing, of course, will be important. And now man's best friend is helping out, too. A Virginia company is training dogs to detect the virus. Mark Martin brings us more on the continuing fight against COVID.
Oh, you want to play. Oh, you want to play.
Instructor James Overton plays with Blade, a German Shepherd Belgian Malinois mix. The 3-year-old is one of dozens at American Canine Interdiction, a Virginia company that says it has real-world canine solutions. Paul Ruscia has led efforts here for 18 years.
Primarily what we do, we take dogs and we condition them to find explosives, narcotics, bed bugs, and COVID. If it has an odor, we can train the dog to find it.
These dogs, they never cease to amaze us. I don't think we deserve these dogs. I think their capabilities, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of the things that these dogs are able to do for us.
Ruscia says the idea to train dogs to detect COVID came after hearing a competitor discuss the concept.
So I mulled it over and prayed over it and led by the Spirit. And the team that you're going to meet here in a little while, we got our heads together and said, here's the methodology we would probably use. So we went with a cheek swab. We didn't use urine, we didn't use sweat, we didn't use the protein molecules. We went with an actual sample from the mouth, pretty much like the SNAP test, if you will.
So we partnered with the hospitals, and they were able to get us samples from people that were currently being treated for COVID-19. We got the cheek swabs from them, and then what we ended up doing is training the dogs to recognize the smell of the cheek swab first.
After that, Overton says they introduced the dogs to the smell of a person's saliva without COVID.
We got the dogs to discriminate between the smell of somebody infected versus not infected with an astonishing accuracy rate.
It's just remarkable how sensitive their olfactory capabilities are and their ability to find this stuff. It's north of 95% accurate.
Andrew Casekamp is in charge of training and education.
I was actually one of the skeptics. I said, there's no way. There's no way. I've done this a long time. I do not believe that it's possible, and I'm kind of glad that they proved me wrong. You know, watching them actually go out and have the accuracy that they have is astounding.
One of the primary benefits for using dogs to detect COVID is speed. Staff here say a dog can screen 30 to 40 people in less than a minute, compared to it takes around 15 minutes to get the results back on just one rapid antigen test. Casekamp and his 3-year-old Dutch Shepherd Pashka demonstrate how it works, while Overton breaks it down for us.
So what this system does is it does a couple things. One, it prevents the dog from actually being able to get the sample. So you'll see this little filter inside of here that actually prevents the dog from being able to stick his nose all the way in and grab the sample out. But what it also does is it also focuses that odor right here into the edge of the funnel. So when you see it later, when the dogs come in, the dog will come in here and stick his nose inside the funnel, able to get that concentrated area of odor right here. And then, you know, if it's a positive sample, then the dog would alert. Otherwise, he'll keep on going.
For our test, Overton uses a neutral odor that was used to train the dogs in the initial training, not an actual virus. As you can see, Pashka alerts by sitting down in front of the target tube.
So if this were a real world situation, the dogs would come in here, each tube system would be labeled so that we know whose sample is which one. With our barcode system that we have in our app, they would come in here. If the dog indicates on this one, then this tube gets flagged as this was one of the hot tubes.
Overton believes the dogs are a match for searching large groups of people.
Anywhere where there's large crowds of people in close proximity to each other. So cruise ships, stadiums, concert venues, schools, hospitals, anywhere, even the airlines, any of those applications would be perfect for something like this.
Rusha says he prays over the dogs constantly and relies on divine intervention.
I ask for that knowledge, wisdom, and discernment on a daily basis. And then just trust the prompting of the Holy Spirit. You know, go find that quiet space. The world's loud, and God likes to whisper. So I like to just go find that quiet little space and wait for His prompting. And if He tells me go forward with it, I do. And if He speaks to my heart and says don't do that, then I don't.
And adds, at the end of the day, his work is all for God's glory. Mark Martin, CBN News, Cartersville, Virginia.
Amazing, and definitely better than swabbing our noses, right? Well, a reveal years in the making. See President and First Lady Obama's official White House portraits next. Finally tonight, a time-honored tradition returns to the White House, bringing with it two former residents. President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle made their way to their former home today for the unveiling of their official presidential portraits. The Obama's portraits were commissioned by the White House Historical Association, and in true loving husband fashion, the former president made it pretty clear he was happy with how his wife's picture turned out.
I want to thank Sharon Sprung for capturing everything I love about Michelle. Her grace, her intelligence, and the fact that she's fine.
The Obama's portraits will join other presidential paintings hanging inside the White House for decades to come. And that's going to do it for Faith Nation. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.